Hi everyone, and welcome back to Decisive Squirrel Homestead. We got rid of our bees, but we did not get rid of the honey. The bees are at my brother's house, and we went last weekend and helped harvest the honey for this year. So we took honey from our hive that we had over here and also his hive that was already at his house. I think we got 7 or 8 gallons of honey. So now I want to deal with the wax. So when you're harvesting the honey, you cut off the wax caps, and that kind of goes into a sort of a trash bin. And then we put this over the strainer and got all of the honey out that we could. But you can see there's still quite a bit of honey in here, and this wax is dirty. There's probably a couple of dead bees and maybe some bee legs and all sorts of trash in this wax. So we want to clean this wax up so we can make some candles with it or chapstick or something like that. So the first thing I'm going to do is take some of this wax and melt it in a pot of water. Now, when you're doing anything with beeswax, you have to have dedicated tools for that. You'll never wash it off of your good pots and pans. So I only have a very small pot because the only thing that goes in this pot is beeswax. It means it's a little bit more work, but it's only once a year, so not a huge deal. The other thing is you have to be very, very careful that you don't start a fire. You don't want to catch the wax on fire. So this first step is probably the most dangerous. I'm just going to put wax straight in here with water and let it all melt. After this, it'll be in a double broiler sort of situation. But we're going to add whatever will fit here, and I'm going to have to do a couple of rounds of this to get all of this wax dealt with. What's going to happen here is this wax is going to melt down. Most of the honey is going to dissolve into the water. All of the dirt and debris is going to be on the bottom of the wax, and then when I let it cool, the cleaner wax is going to be on top. So I'll be able to take out that disc of wax that's on top, kind of scrape off or cut off anything that's on the bottom of that, and then I'll have much cleaner wax to work with from that point on. So we're just going to watch this very carefully, make sure it doesn't get too hot, and just let it go long enough for all of that wax to melt, and then we'll turn it off and leave it until it solidifies again. All right, so you can see the wax is mostly melted. It's not quite there yet. We're almost done. Again, this is a knife that I've just sacrificed to beeswax. This is the only thing I use it for. No beeswax on your good kitchen stuff. Also, no washing beeswax down your sink. That's a great way to clog your pipes. Think about where you're putting all the wax whenever you're cleaning up your stuff. We're gonna get this totally melted down. So when this just barely gets to a boil, you can see all that clean yellow wax coming up to the top. And all of this dirty grit will be more on the bottom. I'll let that just very, very gently boil just a little bit. Make sure the pot doesn't boil over, because wax mixed with the flame of your stove is not going to be a good time. And then we're just going to turn that off and let it sit undisturbed until the wax completely solidifies on top. And that'll be our first stage of getting some of these impurities out of the wax. All right, my beeswax that I had in boiling water yesterday has now completely solidified. So there's water in the bottom of this pot and then a disc of wax on top. Now, this is just a free pot I had from my grandmother's house. It's not ideal for this because it curves in a little bit here at the top. So I do have to kind of wedge this out most of the time. But we're going to pour that water out, and hopefully you can see it's dark water now. Most of the honey dissolved into the water. So that's a big part of this step is getting that extra honey out. That came out pretty easy. So this is what the top of this wax disc looked like. And then on the bottom, just a bunch of crud. Crystallized honey. I don't see, oh, there are some bee parts in here. So I'm just going to take my knife that I have sacrificed to beeswax, and I'm going to scrape some of the extra stuff off of this disc. Again, I'm doing this outside because you definitely don't want to do this like in your sink and clog up your pipes. So I'm just doing this out here into the grass, and this is not going to be perfectly clean. There's a few more steps that have to happen, but I'm trying to get just the big stuff out. If I had a bigger pot and I had a thicker disc of wax, I could cut this whole bottom layer off. But if I did that with the tools that I have, I would end up wasting a lot of it. So, still pretty dirty. I'm just getting the big stuff off. But that's the first step, and now I need to repeat this with all of the other wax that I have. All right, it's been a couple of days and I have gotten all of my wax into these still pretty dirty discs from melting it with the water. And now I'm going to just melt the wax by itself and then pour it through cheesecloth to get it mostly filtered out. So I have my same pot that I was using to boil the wax in water. It's pretty dirty. The only thing that goes in it is beeswax, and this is what I'm gonna melt it in. Since there's no water in the pot this time, it's gonna be basically double broiler. So I've got another pot here with some water in it that's heating up, and I'm gonna put the wax pot on top of that. And then I have another small pot that I also use for beeswax that the clean wax is gonna go in. So let's get started with that. So my cleaner pot, I think this is 4 layers of cheesecloth that I'm going to put over the top of it. Just going to do it this way so it doesn't spill so easily, and I'm just going to use a rubber band to keep that on so it doesn't slide off when I pour the wax through it. I'm going to set that aside and see how much of this wax I can fit into this pot. And we've been canning also, so you might be able to hear the pressure canner cooling down over there, but it does not need supervision anymore, so it's a good time to work on finishing up this beeswax. All right, now that this is all melted down, I'm gonna blot off the water off the bottom of my pot and hopefully pour it through here without any mishaps. So you can see we have filtered out most of that dried up honey and bee parts and everything that was in the wax. And get my rubber band off. not to do that. No! Real life mishaps. All right, now that the wax is mostly filtered, we are going to filter it again through pantyhose. So I have put actually knee-high, not pantyhose, over the top of the pan, and I'm trying to pour it into these chocolate molds that I'm not using for chocolate, because I found that those work really well for giving me small amounts of wax, so I don't have to break up big chunks or melt big chunks when I go to use it. The trick to this is, as everything cools down, it gets harder to manage and pour where you want it to go. But it does work pretty good for just using things that we have on hand and getting this wax to a usable state. Now I'm obviously making some drips and some spills, and that is okay too, because those will just pop right off that plastic and be perfect extra little chips. So when I'm trying to measure out wax for chapstick or something like that, I can easily get just a little bit of extra if I need it to get the right weight. So it's a little bit messy, but it's also useful. That was too much. So you can see what was left behind that the pantyhose filtered out is the extra crud that I accidentally dumped in there, but also any really, really small impurities that were in there. The pantyhose keeps those from going out into the chunks of wax that I'm going to use for things. All right, so our chocolate molds are filled. We also have this silicone cupcake mold. It's shaped like pineapples because it was on clearance. And now, once the wax cools down, they pop out of here really easy. So then you have a nice disc of clean beeswax. This one needs to cool down a little bit more. And you can use these for all sorts of things, anything you want to use beeswax for. The little drips that are on here, I also save those. They just come right off. And that can be, that needs to cool down more. That can be extra for whenever I'm making something. So that is how we clean the beeswax that we get from harvesting honey.